The Pentagon announced this week it would begin exhuming the remains of nearly 400 sailors and Marines who perished at Pearl Harbor and who are now buried in anonymous mass graves in Honolulu. It's all because of a 93-year-old survivor of the 1941 attack who's been working tirelessly through the years to identify as many fallen sailors and Marines as possible.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
With nearly 2,400 killed, the Japanese bombardment on Pearl Harbor remains one of the deadliest attacks in U.S. history. Minutes after the first bombs dropped, the USS Oklahoma capsized and sank. 429 sailors and Marines went down with it. More than 70 years later, the majority of those service members are still in Hawaii, buried in mass graves. Their remains never identified, marked simply with a set of numbers and one word, unknowns. Their comrade, Navy veteran and Pearl Harbor survivor Ray Emery, believes that's simply not good enough.
Every one of those graves got a story to tell.
He's embarked on a final military campaign of sorts. His mission, to restore the names of the fallen. For years, he scoured through medical and service records, trying to piece together who's who, all while pushing the government to do the same. This week, the Pentagon announced it would join his cause. In a statement, Deputy Defense Secretary Robert Work said, analysis of all available evidence indicates that most Oklahoma crew members could be identified individually if the caskets associated with the ship were disinterred. The Secretary of Defense and I will work tirelessly to ensure your loved ones' remains will be recovered, identified, and returned to you as expeditiously as possible, and we will do so with dignity, respect, and care. The Defense Department hopes to identify most of the unknown service members from the USS Oklahoma and return them to their families for burial with full military honors.
We are going to start with USS Oklahoma, but we will also be looking at other unknown graves and determining whether they are eligible for disinterment in the future.
With us now from New York is Tom Gray. He's a relative of one of the sailors killed at Pearl Harbor. Tom, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks very much for what you're doing. Tell us, first of all, about your relative, Edwin Hopkins.
Edwin Hopkins, obviously, he was a fireman third class, and when the Oklahoma went down, he went down with it. It was raised in 1943, and at that point, he was buried in Halava Cemetery. In 1949, in preparation to put the sailors into the punch bowl, he was exhumed with a number of others. And then at that point, because of a lot of decisions that were made at the time, there was confusion, and he and a number of other sailors were put into unknown graves. Ray Emery, thanks to his great research, eventually we found out in 2008 that Edward Hopkins actually had been recovered. His remains were marked Edwin Hopkins in 1943, but when the switchover came, it was places unknown. At that point, the Oklahoma family did research, tracked down, there was 27 people in the same category as my cousin. And they opened up one of the graves in the early 2000s. 5 people were in it. They were recovered and brought home. Unfortunately, there were about 60 to 100 other remains in the grave. So at that point, the Navy decided, for different reasons, not to continue with the program.
The Navy actually began this process, as you know, to try to identify unknown remains, what, about a decade ago? But then the whole operation stopped. What happened?
Well, apparently there was a lot of confusion, or there was a lot of worry about the remains that were in the grave with the 5 sailors that were supposed to be in there. So at that point, a decision had been made not to go forward until all the remains from that casket had been identified. So that stopped the process.
Has there been any pushback from families who don't want this process to go forward, who don't want these remains disturbed?
When we started this process, again, I started this process mainly with my cousin, but then it started to evolve into the 22 sailors that this discrepancies concerned that Ray Emery had found out about. And in that, when we, my state rep, Sean Scanlon, actually was working for Senator Chris Murphy in Connecticut, and they picked up on this issue. And he interviewed all the families. There's 18 people concerning the 22 sailors left across the United States. And at that point, one person had objections to it. They've since passed away, and the rest of the people that are concerned, they're all for it. I understand the other point of view. I think it's valid, but we want our relatives home with us.
Tom Gray, thanks very much. Good luck to you.